It is a perilous thing to write an historical account of recent events well within the living memory of many people. Invariably, we get it wrong in some ways. Our accounts are incomplete or limited in perspective. So I suspect these last portions of the Plymouth history will function as an equal opportunity offender with at least a little something to grate on almost everyone. So think of this, if you will, as something of a sketch or an outline of more recent events. We'll focus on the pastors of the period, largely because that's how the material is most easily organized. The story begins with the ministry of Frederick Meek. As was true after the ministry of A.L. Frisbee in the 19th century, the 20th century King David figure, Stoddard Lane, was followed by a succession of relatively brief pastorates. But in this instance, the reason was quite different. Successors were called away to significant new responsibilities in the wider denomination. Fred Meek was the first of Plymouth ministers to be born in the 20th century. Born in England in 1902, he was raised in Canada. As was true of Stoddard Lane, Meek was Presbyterian in background. He earned his B.A. from Mount Allison College, his B.D. from Yale Divinity School in 1929, and an honorary D.D. from Bowdoin College in Maine in 1939. His prior pastorates were at Dwight Place Congregational Church in New Haven, 1928 to 1930, Second Congregational Church of Biddeford, Maine, 1932 to 1936, and All Souls Congregational Church in Bangor, 1936 to 1943. In Bangor, Meek also began a radio ministry, weekly services, and a Thursday evening program entitled Living from Day to Day. His children included Sheila, born in 1935, and son Peter, born in 1943. Now, Peter also went into the ministry, and since 1980 has served as the senior minister of the Hancock Church in Lexington, Massachusetts. Prior to that, Peter was at the Berlin Congregational Church in Berlin, Connecticut, where his director of Christian education and youth work was none other than me. Here I am on the right in a slightly hairy version. Actually, this was after I had cut my hair. In order to serve on this staff, evidently you had to have a first name with 5 letters and a last name with 4. Meek began his ministry at Plymouth on November 7th, 1943, just a bit less than 6 months following the death of Stoddard Lane. Here's a card that was mailed out to encourage the congregation to turn out to welcome him. Note the sermon title, A Great Faith for a Great Time. It's not that he wanted Christianity to be fun, but that he thought they were living through a momentous period in history. Meek came with a strong track record in ecumenism. He had been the president of the Maine Council of Churches and was the keynote speaker at the first meeting of the Iowa Interchurch Council, precursor of the now-defunct Ecumenical Ministries of Iowa. The post-war period would be the heyday of councils of churches. In an initial interview, he told the Des Moines Register, "I am fully convinced that Christian churches of America have a job that is too big for them to do alone. I agree with the late Bishop Charles H. Brent, who said, 'The world is too strong for a divided church.'" Meek's relatively brief time at Plymouth was significant. It was he who was responsible for beginning the publication of a weekly newsletter mailed to members' homes, the Plymouth Herald. Prior to this time, announcements were simply distributed on Sunday mornings. Meek also initiated the recording and recognition of memorial gifts to the church. But he also took leadership in helping the church face the great issues before it. One of these was simply thinking about how the world should be after World War II. Here's one of his columns in which he writes, "5 years ago, almost to the day, The second part of the World War became officially accepted through Germany's invasion of Poland. Since then, the people of America and of the freedom-loving nations of the world have passed through many enormous dangers and have had many widely varied attitudes to the struggle. And now it is assumed that if we continue to pay the price asked in treasure and in human life and suffering, victory in arms will come. I wonder with grave doubting if the American people and the allies of America are ready for the obligations of that victory. It will take more than a successful economic and political plan for reconversion to a peacetime economy to prepare us for what lies ahead. Just around the corner are enemies as powerful as those we are now vanquishing, a possible moral breakdown in American life, potential bloodshed between races in America, a threatening economic struggle for power and control that will bear the marks of civil war. It will take new men and women to build a world and a country and a community, or a home, one whit better than the past. It will take men and women who understand that all they do is in vain if it does not accord with the purposes of the Creator God as they are embedded in the structure of the universe. Life destroys itself when it tries to evade these purposes. The institution that more than any other in society is devoted to making these purposes plain is the church. Therefore, it deserves our joint support in greater measure than ever before. Let us be in our places Sunday morning and every Sunday morning. It is part of our testimony about our desire to know and find the way of all ways, the way of God. You can sense in those words Meek's intellect and his passion. He also challenged Plymouth to take on the issue of the building debt that remained from the 1920s. Original plans had called for repayment of our indebtedness within 15 years, but with the Depression that time frame was extended and no clear end was in sight. Meek began to beat the drum for paying off the debt. Here is an article printed in the Herald. Notice that the other front page article concerns an upcoming Children's Sunday program. Paying off the debt made good economic sense. The reason is simple. People have more money now than they've had in years. Money spent for consumer goods is inflationary in its tendency. Money contributed for debt reduction is anti-inflationary. Inflation is with us in too great degree. The service rendered by helping in debt reduction will become the more apparent as we move into the inevitable recession. Unemployment in some degree is inescapable. All this will naturally be reflected in reduced church income, and unfortunately, when budgets have to be revised, debt service is not a flexible item. With the end of the war, a basic need will be civilian buying to replace the curtailed and canceled government contracts. A great backlog of church and renovations can be an invaluable factor in the period of transition. The time to raise funds, however, is now, not at the end of hostilities. And now, here is the bulletin for that next Sunday, the one with the children's program, and there on the front cover is a plea to deal with the debt. Meek was skilled at maximizing the impact of his communication, using a high attendance opportunity to get this message in before the congregation scattered before the summer. Meek organized a series of meetings to help people get serious about dealing with the debt. Although the actual mortgage burning did not take place until 1951, Meek made it possible by setting the wheels in motion. Fred Meek left Plymouth when he was called to the pulpit of Old South Church in Boston, where he served with distinction for the rest of his ministry. He was still at Old South when I met him briefly in the 1970s, when he came to Connecticut to preach at the installation of his son Peter. I don't remember what he said on that occasion, but I remember being impressed by his booming voice and commanding presence. Here is the issue of the Herald announcing Dr. Meek's resignation. and here is an article recounting the sadness with which his last Sunday was met. Dr. Meek made his announcement after a moving sermon on the proportion of life that man dedicates to God's world and to his own. Tears moistened the eyes of many members of the congregation as they sang the closing hymn, Faith of Our Fathers. In the case of some ministers, I might suspect that they had written such an article themselves, but not Fred Meek. His was a truly significant, albeit brief, pastorate at Plymouth. When he left, one of the members of the committee that searched for a successor was Ray Strawn. And Ray would later be a member of First Central in Omaha, where I was the senior minister. Here Ray and I are pictured on a fishing trip. What a small world it is. The successor that Ray and the rest of the committee identified was Fred Hoskins. Hoskins was born in Allenville, Illinois on January 8, 1908. He earned his B.A. from Illinois College in Jacksonville in 1926 and his B.D. from Yale Divinity School in 1932. He married Alice Gardner in 1927, and they had 3 children, Bob and Ted, both UCC ministers, and Mary Ellen. They needed a Carol. If they'd had a Carol, they could have been Bob and Carol, Ted and Alice. Hoskins' only pastorate prior to Plymouth was at the United Congregational Church of Bridgeport, Connecticut, where he served for 9 years, from 1937 to 1946. He was at Plymouth from 1946 to 1950. But he's probably best known for what he did after his time at Plymouth Church. He served the First Congregational Church of Oak Park, Illinois from 1950 to 1956, and then he went into the service of the wider church. While at Plymouth, Hoskins is remembered for having presided over the 2090 anniversary celebration in 1947. That's the 20th anniversary of the sanctuary and the 90th anniversary of the church. He initiated the Plymouth Colony System, now defunct. That was an organizational system whereby the membership was divided into colonies according to where they lived, in the hope that these geographic clusters would foster fellowship and help people feel more connected to the church. It's an idea that's been tried in a lot of places, but generally geography alone is not enough to bind folks together, and churches have better success organizing small groups around common interests. Hoskins was very, very skilled in process and organization. During his pastorate, the Plymouth committee structure was reformed, although the issue of representation, of genders and ages, for example, would not be addressed until many years later. But the organization was streamlined and improved. I mentioned that Hoskins was best known for what he did after Plymouth. Here is a picture of Fred and Alice at the 100th anniversary of Plymouth in 1957, 7 years after his term here ended. His return was significant because he had gone on to become the head of the Congregational Christian Churches and one of the first co-presidents of the United Church of Christ. Hoskins was elected minister and general secretary of the General Council of the Congregational Christian Churches in 1956. Now, in general, the longer a church leader's title, the less real authority he or she has. When your title's Pope, you have a lot of clout. When it's General Secretary of the General Council of the Congregational Christian Churches, you can tell that the denomination in question is something of an organizational free-for-all. Hoskins was a key figure in negotiations leading to formation of the United Church of Christ. Along with James Wagner, president of the Evangelical and Reformed Church, shorter title, more authority, he became one of the first co-presidents of the United Church of Christ, formed in 1957. He served in this capacity for 4 years until adoption of the first bylaws and statement of faith of the UCC. Interestingly enough, the statement of faith was written by 16 theologians, 8 from each of the 2 predecessor denominations. Nels Ferre, Faith Ferre's father, was one of the 8 Congregational Christian theologians who participated. It was he who was responsible for the statement, "God seeks in holy love to save all people from aimlessness and sin." It's one of my favorite lines. Here is a wonderful picture of Fred Hoskins presiding at General Synod and receiving the brand new Pilgrim hymnal from the hand of the chair of the hymnal committee. That committee chair was James Lenhart, who would later serve Plymouth Church. The picture quality isn't great, but it is wonderful to see these 2 Plymouth ministers pictured in this national denominational setting. We'll see the picture again. In 1962, Fred Hoskins left denominational leadership to become the professor of parish ministry at Chicago Theological Seminary. In 1964, he returned to the parish, going to the Garden City Community Church in Garden City, Long Island, New York. And there, just 2 years later, he suffered a heart attack at a church staff meeting, and he died on April 20th, 1966. Fred Hoskins was warmly remembered for his contributions to the life of the United Church of Christ. We find this from the UCC website. The story of the United Church of Christ is the story of people serving God through the church. Co-President James E. Wagner, a graduate of Lancaster Seminary, parish minister, seminary professor, and instructor in Bible, brought intellectual and spiritual stature, wisdom, and brotherly warmth. To match the generous personality of Co-President Fred Hoskins, gifted Congregational Christian professor and pastor of liberal theological orientation and consummate organizational ability. I assure you that there aren't many folks from the congregational side of things who are treasured for their consummate organizational ability. Hoskins was succeeded by Charles Hauser, who had a truly significant pastorate at Plymouth from 1950 to 1959. He was born in 1899 in Pittston, Pennsylvania. Like Stoddard Lane, he was the son of a Presbyterian minister. Hauser attended Harvard for 3 years, during which time he served as an assistant to Raymond Calkins at First Church in Cambridge. He completed his undergraduate work at the University of Chicago while serving as the director of Young People's Work at First Congregational Church in LaGrange, Illinois. He earned his B.D. from Chicago Theological Seminary and was awarded the honorary Doctor of Divinity from Defiance College. In addition to his work while an undergraduate, Hauser served pastorates at the New England Congregational Church in Aurora, Illinois, the Park Congregational Church in Greeley, Colorado, and Plymouth Congregational Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where he served for 11 years. Immediately prior to coming to Des Moines, he was at the East Congregational Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, for 6 years. Charles Hauser became the senior minister of Plymouth on September 10th, 1950. The brochure introducing Hauser to the congregation makes for interesting reading. It announces that Dr. Hauser comes to Plymouth with a record as a church builder in the strongest sense. During his 17 years as minister at Fort Wayne and Grand Rapids, he added 2,850 members to church rolls. Indeed, he was a skilled church builder, both of membership and of program, at a time when mainline churches were growing by leaps and bounds. With regard to money, we read that Dr. Hauser does not consider himself a money-raising minister. His principal interest is in building an active, friendly church. He believes, with ministers notable in the field of endeavor, that if you have an adequate church program, you don't have to worry about expenses. They'll take care of themselves. If you build it, they will come, and they will pay their way. One of the important ways in which Charlie Hauser built the program at Plymouth Church was through music. 2 years into his pastorate, he brought John Dexter to Des Moines. Hauser and Dexter had worked together in Grand Rapids, and Dexter became, according to news articles of the time, the first full-time church musician in Des Moines. He was organist and choir director here and at Tifereth Israel Synagogue. He also directed the Friends of Music, a community music group. The Plymouth program included 5 children's choirs, among them the Matins. He also started a Christian arts festival, featuring a variety of forms of artistic expression. And the Plymouth Rhythmic Choir also began during this period. Hauser also started the annual Pilgrim Thanksgiving service. Here is some promotional material for it. Note the bulletin portraying the mostly naked savages in the snow alongside fully clothed Europeans. Our sensibilities about these things certainly have changed. During the Hauser years, the mortgage was retired at long last. Here is the famous picture from 1951 of Harry G. Wallace burning the mortgage along with H. Pierce Whitmer. Dr. Hauser is visible beaming a great smile in the background. The Rose Festival was another product of the Hauser years. This was an annual event in which the sanctuary would be decorated with crosses made entirely of flowers and greenery. This visual presentation would be augmented by meditative music and explanatory lectures, following which there was a formal tea. This was conducted for several years. Charlie Hauser had a genius for celebration. In 1951, the community house was renamed the Burling House in honor of Dr. and Mrs. James Burling. Burling had been a beloved pastor of the old Greenwood Church, which merged with Plymouth in 1925. He left Des Moines for a time, and then in retirement returned here and lived just across the street from Plymouth Church on 41st Street. This proximity made him available for various pastoral services, including weddings, funerals, and Bible studies, and he was held in high esteem by the Plymouth congregation. And the renaming of the community house was a creative way to honor his many contributions to Plymouth Church. On a similar note, memorial monies were used to remodel 2 church school rooms into the Stoddard Lane Chapel on the 2nd floor of the educational wing, on the level that is now administrative offices. Sadly, the chapel was sacrificed in the remodeling of the building that was completed in 2003, and the Lane Memorial is now in the hallway near Waveland Hall in the newly constructed area. The list of innovative and enduring programs goes on. In 1954, the Plymouth Nursery School was begun. It was established as a pilot project at the request of the Iowa Congregational Christian Conference, part of the church's response to the baby boom of the 1950s. The nursery school still serves children and families with high-quality preschool education. The 1950s also saw annual productions of Amal and the Night Visitors, and the Lenten breakfasts were begun, initially just for men. Doris Hauser was active in the community during her years in Des Moines. She earned a master's in education at Drake University. She taught at Hills Elementary School, and she was the first woman to be elected president of the Des Moines Area Council of Churches. Charles Hauser left Plymouth on June 28, 1959. He went to serve the Alameda Community Congregational Church in California. Having seen the before and after pictures of Stoddard Lane, how different he looked at the end of his Plymouth ministry from the way he looked at the beginning, I took particular interest in the farewell brochure prepared for the Hausers. Here it is. His sermon title that last Sunday was the final word. And here are the before and after pictures side by side. It looks as though he held up pretty well. But that's because they used the same picture.